Hello. So, somebody asked me earlier today on YouTube if I had written up the startup instructions for the Aerosoft CRJ or Bombardier CRJ in Microsoft Flight Simulator. And I thought I had, and I went and looked, and obviously I hadn't, so I can't really remember where I learnt the procedure. I must have just done it via the checklists within the aircraft in the past. So I have written up a functional startup procedure that misses out all the checks and balances, as I usually do, for the CRJ. So we're going to run through them. So if you look in the notes that go with this video, you will see there is a link to Google Drive where you can get to my downloadable procedures, and you can now find one for the CRJ. So I have not actually tested it yet. I've written it up and kind of sat in the aeroplane going through the checklist, and we're going to try it out together here, and we're going to see if it works. So the first thing I've written down is to press escape and go and look at the control configuration. So we are going to have a quick look, and you can see I've got my throttle quadrant over here, and I have a profile called CRJ which I have chosen, and that's all we're going to get into about that at the moment. So I've got the correct control configuration. So now I'm going to go inside the cockpit, and we're going to press Control and 1. And we're going to turn on the power on the tablet by clicking on the screen. And you can see it boots up with Aerosoft. And then we're going to go to the aircraft tab, and we're going to say ground power is connected by clicking on the ground power icon. We're now going to press Control and 2 to go to the overhead screen, and we're going to say electrical power at the top left, it's up here, battery master to on, and DC service to on. Now the whole tablet part is actually optional. If you don't use the tablet, you don't have to bother with DC service. So if I move the camera slightly, you can see it says DC service up there. Okay, so we could just run off battery power if we needed to. Okay, so at the bottom left of this screen you have the external lights. So to communicate to the ground crew that we are on board, we're going to go and turn the nav lights on. We then go and arm the emergency lights, which are over here, which is now done. And again, I'm changing page to the next page. This goes on for pages. Control and 6. When we look at the central pedestal, we are going to look at the IRS section. And if you look at it just from here, you won't see it. You have to lift this armrest up, and there's the IRS section down here. We're going to turn IRS 1 and 2 to nav. That's the inertial navigation system. Again, it takes a few moments to align itself, so we do it first. We then go back overhead, so Control 2, and we look at the APU section, which is in the middle. We need to hit the power fuel button and then the start stop button. And if we go and look outside the aircraft and we go and zoom round to the back, you will see this small flap is opening up, or has opened up already before we got here. That is the intake for the auxiliary power unit, which is a small jet engine. You can see heat pouring out of it already. You see the screen wobbling around. So that starts up the auxiliary power unit. So I'll press End to go back inside the aircraft. So yeah, so the power fuel button opened the vent for it, or the intake I should say, and the start stop button started it, and it lit up saying start, and then start went out when it was running. So to check that, we can press Control 5, and we can actually go and press, oh, you can't see it in the sunshine here, there's a button that says Elec right there. When you press Elec, you get a view of the electrical systems, and because I'm obviously going so slow because I'm talking, this has already happened, but you can see there's APU is there, and you can see when it starts generating, which it has started generating electricity. Okay, so after doing that, we press Control 2 and we go back overhead, and we go to the Pass Signs button at the bottom right, and we want to say no smoking on and seatbelts to auto, which is the downward switch. So no smoking to auto and seatbelts to auto. Anti-ice at the bottom right. We go and turn both of these switches to low. In the pilot seat, we press Control 4. We look at the FMC and we go and program our flight. So if we just go and zoom in on this, so this is the flight management computer, or FMC. First thing we need to do is position initialization. So we go and choose an airport that we are at. So we are at Oxford, which is EGTK. The reason it's K is because it's actually in Kidlington, which is just outside of Oxford. Okay, we need to set position, so we select the FMS position and drop it in. We go to the flight plan and we'll just make something up. So EGTK, we'll go to Edinburgh, for example, which would be EGPH, and we will then go to performance initialization. We'll put our cruise altitude in. We'll go to 25,000 feet. So the square fields, I'm not going to get into too much detail on the FMC. The square fields are mandatory. So fuel, I don't actually know what fuel I've got, so I'm going to put 5,000 kilograms in. It's probably there or thereabouts for 50% load out of fuel. Anything with hyphens is a optional field, so we can execute that change. We can go to the departure arrival screen. We can say we are leaving Oxford. We're going to depart going north, so we'll do the runway 01, execute. We'll go back to departure arrivals, go to the arrival into Edinburgh. We'll go ILS into runway 06. We'll do the EGP E1E standard approach route and we'll execute that. And at that point, we can go to legs and we can see there's a discontinuity there, so we can select and close up the gap. There's another one further down, so we can go next page, select the waypoint after the discontinuity, select it and it'll pull it up over the top, and we can execute that and have a look down, and that's, yeah, the flight plan's complete now. Okay, so that's the basics of the flight plan done. Obviously there's more you can fill in, which we're not going to bother with. So what's next on our list? So it says here, after we've programmed the flight plan and the performance data, we are actually ready to start the engines at this point. So pushback could happen now. So if we go and have a look, we're not somewhere where we need to push back, we're just parked up on an airfield. So we don't need to worry about that. Okay, Control and 5 will now take us to the cockpit view. We need to lift. This is the point where we're going to start the engines. So we need to lift these red markers on the engines and move them to their idle position. Okay? We do that with the mouse. Don't bother trying to do it with the throttles because you'll just get in a mess with it. Press Control and 2 to go back overhead, and we've got the external lights section at the bottom left. Because we're going to start the engines, we're going to turn the beacon lights on to inform anybody nearby what we're about to do. So that's kind of a convention thing more than anything. Fuel section, top center, we go and turn on the boost pumps, because without fuel the engines aren't going to do much. Engine section in the center, we can see it here, we can just start the left and the right engines, and you'll hear that happening in the background. While we're waiting for that, we can go to the pilot view, and if we watch the status display here, we can see the numbers coming up for the engines. We'll actually hear a sound when the engines get up to idle. So if we just sit and wait for them for a few moments, you can see them coming up. You can see the N2 numbers are the, if I zoom in slightly, the N2 number is the gas turbine, the N1 is the turbofan. There's two stages to the engine. ITT, I can never remember what the acronym is, or what the letters stand for. It's interstage temperature, inter-turbine temperature I think it means, or internal turbine temperature. It's basically the temperature of the gas inside the engine. So there we have the sound, which means the engines are now up to speed. Okay, so having got the sound from the engines going up to speed, we go back overhead and we can turn off the APU, so we can stop the APU because crossover happens automatically in the CRJ, and then we can close that flap outside. Okay, then in the hydraulics section we can turn all of the hydraulics to auto. So I've gone the wrong way there, so we can use the mouse wheel on this to flick them down to auto, and that gives us hydraulic power to the control surfaces. Air conditioning, top right. We can switch on both L and R packs, and we can turn the recirculation on. Air conditioning, so that's done. Next page. Pedestal, control 6. Yaw damper. So if I zoom in, yaw dampers are here. So we click both of them. Notice no light comes on, but you can monitor this by looking at the screen here. So if I press F to center my view up and just look at this screen, you can see the only things left are Mac trim and stab trim, which we're about to do. So down here, there was the yaw damper. Just to the bottom left of it, you've got the stab trim, so you click both, and the Mac trim, which you click, and that's that one done as well. Okay, at this point, we should be able to look up, and all of the notices will have vanished off of the status screen, which they have, which is good. So we are almost ready to taxi, and I've realised this is missing. We need to go and arm the nose wheel steering, which I have just done. Okay, so then we go to the tablet. So we can't taxi unless we have removed the chocks, which we have now done. Okay. So then we press Control 5, and then we can, this is just to monitor things basically. We can move the flaps to takeoff position, which you can see the lever moving over here, and I've moved it to 8 degrees. We also at this point would release the parking brake, so we drop this lever down just by clicking on it down here, and you might even see the aircraft start to roll at this point because it's actually got a small amount of positive thrust. It hasn't started rolling yet. Okay, so Control 2, we look at the lights section at the bottom left and turn the recognition taxi lights to on. Okay, so there's our taxi lights. So we can press F now to center the view up, and we can start taxiing. I'm not going to start taxiing it because I'm busy talking and I'm rubbish at multitasking. There are some things you would do on the way to the runway. So you press Control 3 and you would be able to configure the master control panel for the autopilot. So we're taking off runway 01. So we're going to spin this heading round. You can see the number over here at the bottom left. We're going to spin it round to 10 degrees, which is the runway direction. We're going to turn on the flight directors so we get the magenta lines. We're going to set the target altitude for our climb out. So today, say it noticed it defaulted to 10,000 feet. So we'll go and set, say, 15,000 for our initial climb out. But again, you would be looking at an operational flight plan to configure this normally. We're going to set maybe nav mode because we've got our flight plan programmed in. So you can see it says FMS over here now. We can set the vertical speed if required for our climb out, so we could go for vertical speed mode. We could use speed mode as well, but I'm not going to get into the various autopilot modes today. But all I'm really illustrating is you could configure everything, so you haven't got much to do when you come off the runway. Okay, so at this point you would taxi out for takeoff. So let's go and do that. So I'm going to increase the throttle slightly, and you can see we're rolling. So we're just going to taxi out. We're at Oxford Airport, by the way, or Kidlington. I think I mentioned that when we were programming the flight computer. So we're just going to taxi out to the runway at Oxford. So all we're looking to do is go and get onto the runway, then we'll turn the strobe lights on, then we obviously accelerate down the runway, and as soon as we are in the air we can, turn the taxi, or sorry, on the runway we can turn the taxi lights off, and then it's just a climb out. So it's gear up, flaps up, autopilot on, start configuring the plane for cruise. It's a bit interesting in the CRJ that it has this far deck throttle system. It's like an electronic throttle where it's pre-configured at various detents of the throttle range to do different things. But I'm not going to get into that today.
Ladies and gentlemen, the captain has advised that we are now clear for takeoff.
It's quite cool, isn't it, that it detects what you're up to. So you get things being announced through the cabin automatically. Okay, so we're just coming up to runway 01 at Oxford. So what we'll do is just have a quick look. So you can see my flight plan just takes us slightly off to the west actually, or to the left of our takeoff direction. So we're going to ease the throttles forwards. So we'll go for max throttle. Not doing very well with the rudder, am I, to hold it in the centre of the runway. And rotate. Gear up. In fact, I don't seem to have the gear connected on the controller, so I'm using the buttons in the cockpit to do that. Flaps up. Throttle reduced.
Too low, terrain.
And autopilot on.
Too low, terrain.
So let's see what happened with the vertical speed. Let's go and configure this ourselves. So you can see vertical speed is here. So yeah, there's no point really, or I didn't set it on the ground. So we'll go for 2,500 feet a minute. What you can do, and again I'm coming to the end of this video because this was just a startup, you can go for speed mode. And then on speed mode you can set your climb out speed, which will obviously be 250 knots. We're obviously going too fast already. So what the plane will do, because it doesn't have an automatic throttle, it will use pitch to control speed. So it's going for a higher climb rate to reduce speed, and then it will reduce the nose up attitude when it gets to the target speed. So obviously we were going far too fast. I'm busy talking and not actually flying the aeroplane. But it is a good example actually, so you'll see the pitch change. So the pitch is coming down, look, to stop the deceleration. So now the plane is busy climbing out basically to 15,000 feet on speed mode. But there you go, so that was using the printed checklist that I've prepared that I will put in the notes of the video. So this was the Aerosoft Bombardier CRJ in Microsoft Flight Simulator. Hopefully you found that instructive. I've got a couple of things to fix in the document before you get to see it. Most notably just the nose wheel steering I forgot to write down. But other than that, everything's pretty much there. So hopefully that's useful to you, and I'll see you again soon. Okay, take care.